The sprawling Martinez mansion stood like a silent sentinel on the outskirts of Mexico City, its grand facade a testament to the wealth and power of its owner. But within its opulent walls, a storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundations of the Martinez family legacy. Amelia Hernandez, a petite woman with eyes that spoke of both innocence and hidden depths, moved quietly through the corridors of the mansion. Her fingers trailed lightly over the polished surfaces she had cleaned 1,000 times before. At just 25, she carried herself with the weariness of someone twice her age, the weight of secrets pressing down upon her slender shoulders. As she approached the study of Mr. Alejandro Martinez, the man whose home she had served for the past 5 years, Amelia's heart began to race. She paused, her hand hovering over the ornate doorknob, and took a deep breath to steady herself. The sound of muffled sobs from within made her hesitate. It wasn't her place to intrude on her employer's private moments of grief, but her duties demanded that she enter. With a gentle knock, Amelia pushed open the door. "Mr. Martinez?" she called softly. "I've brought your afternoon tea." The figure hunched over the mahogany desk didn't stir. Alejandro Martinez, once a titan of industry with a commanding presence that could fill a room, now seemed diminished. His silver hair, usually impeccably styled, was disheveled, and his normally pristine suit was wrinkled as if he had slept in it. "Mr. Martinez?" Amelia tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. This time, he looked up. The pain in his bloodshot eyes made Amelia's heart constrict. It had been 3 months since the tragic accident that took the life of Carlos Martinez, Alejandro's only son and heir. The vibrant young man who had once filled the mansion with laughter was gone, leaving behind a father broken by grief and a home that felt more like a mausoleum. "Ah, Amelia," Alejandro said, his voice hoarse. "Just leave it there." He gestured vaguely towards a side table before returning his gaze to the framed photograph in his hands. A picture of Carlos, his brilliant smile forever frozen in time. Amelia nodded and moved to set down the tray. As she arranged the delicate porcelain cups and saucers, she couldn't help but steal glances at her employer. The man she saw bore little resemblance to the commanding figure who had hired her 5 years ago. Back then, she had been a nervous girl fresh from her small village, in awe of the grandeur around her. Now, she felt a different kind of awe, a somber recognition of how fragile even the mightiest could be in the face of loss. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, turning to leave. Alejandro looked up, his eyes focusing on her properly for the first time. "No, that will be all, Amelia. Thank you." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Wait." There was a moment of silence, heavy with unspoken words. You were here when it happened, weren't you? When we received the news about Carlos?" Amelia felt her throat tighten. "Yes, Mr. Martinez. I was. Did you know him well?" The question seemed to cost him great effort, as if by asking, he was admitting how little he knew of his own son's life. For a moment, Amelia's carefully constructed facade threatened to crumble. Memories flooded her mind, stolen glances, secret smiles, whispered promises in the dark. She swallowed hard, forcing them back. I knew him as much as any of the staff did, sir. He was always kind to us." Alejandro nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to the photograph. "Kind," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, he was that. Too kind for this world, perhaps." He fell silent again, lost in thought. Amelia stood frozen, her hand on the doorknob. She should leave, she knew, but something kept her rooted to the spot. The air in the room felt charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for a storm to break. "You may go, Amelia," Alejandro said finally, his voice distant. With a quick nod, she slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. Once in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the outline of the locket hidden beneath her uniform, the locket that held her most precious secret. As she made her way back to the servants' quarters, Amelia's mind raced. For 3 months, she had mourned in silence, carrying her grief like a stone in her heart. Every corner of the mansion held memories of Carlos, his laugh echoing in the gardens, his gentle touch in the shadowed alcoves, his whispered dreams of a future they would build together. Now, for the first time since the accident, Mr. Martinez had spoken of his son to her. It was as if a door had cracked open, letting in a sliver of light. But with that light came danger. If anyone were to discover the truth of her relationship with Carlos, everything would change. Amelia reached her small room and closed the door, leaning against it as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. Her gaze fell on the battered suitcase tucked beneath her bed, the suitcase she and Carlos had packed together on that last, fateful night. It contained all their plans, all their hopes for a life away from the scrutiny of the Martinez name. With trembling hands, she knelt and pulled out the suitcase. Inside, buried beneath a few modest belongings, was a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Amelia ran her fingers over the familiar handwriting, feeling the weight of unspoken words. As she unfolded the topmost letter, a photograph slipped out, a candid shot of her and Carlos, heads bent close together, lost in conversation. The sight of his smile, so full of life and love, brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Oh, Carlos," she whispered, clutching the photo to her chest. "What am I going to do?" The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her start. Quickly, she shoved the letters and photograph back into the suitcase and slid it under the bed. As she straightened her uniform, a knock came at the door. "Amelia?" It was Mrs. Guzman, the housekeeper. "Mr. Martinez wants to see you in his study." Immediately, Amelia's blood ran cold. "I'll be right there," she called out, fighting to keep her voice steady. As she made her way back to the study, her mind whirled with possibilities. Had Mr. Martinez somehow discovered her secret? Had someone seen her with the letters? The short walk felt like an eternity, each step bringing her closer to a confrontation she had dreaded for months. When she entered the study, she found Mr. Martinez standing by the window, his back to her. The room was thick with tension, and Amelia felt her pulse quicken. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alejandro turned, and the look in his eyes made Amelia's heart stop. In his hand was a piece of paper, a letter she recognized instantly. It was the one Carlos had written the night before the accident, the one where he had poured out his heart, declaring his love for her and their plans to elope. "Amelia," Alejandro said, his voice dangerously calm, "I think it's time we had a talk about my son." The world seemed to tilt beneath Amelia's feet. As she stared at the letter in Mr. Martinez's hand, she realized that her carefully guarded secret was about to explode into the open, changing everything forever. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence, counting down the moments until Amelia would have to face the truth she had hidden for so long. With a deep breath, she steeled herself for the confrontation that was about to unfold, a confrontation that would unravel the very fabric of life in the Martinez mansion and set in motion a chain of events that would lead to shocking revelations, bitter betrayals, and perhaps, ultimately, to healing and redemption. But as she opened her mouth to speak, little did Amelia know that this was just the beginning of a story far more twisted and dramatic than she could ever have imagined. The secrets lurking in the shadows of the Martinez mansion were about to come to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece seemed to grow louder with each passing second, filling the oppressive silence of Mr. Martinez's study. Amelia stood rooted to the spot, her eyes fixed on the letter in her employer's hand. Her mind raced, searching desperately for words that could explain, justify, or perhaps even deny the truth that was now laid bare before them. Alejandro Martinez's face was an unreadable mask as he held up the letter, his knuckles white with tension. "Explain this," he said, his voice low and controlled, but with an undercurrent of fury that made Amelia flinch. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could she possibly explain years of secret longing, stolen moments of happiness, and dreams of a future that now lay shattered? "I'm waiting, Amelia," Alejandro pressed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been involved with my son?" The word, involved, dripped with disdain, and Amelia felt a flash of anger cut through her fear. She straightened her back, meeting Alejandro's gaze with a newfound courage. "It wasn't like that, Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Carlos and I, we loved each other. The words hung in the air between them, a declaration that seemed to physically impact Alejandro. He staggered back slightly, as if struck. Love? He spat. What could you possibly know about love? You're nothing but a maid, a gold digger who seduced my son for his money. Amelia's cheeks burned with indignation. That's not true, she cried. I loved Carlos for who he was, not for his name or his money. We were going to leave all of this behind, start a new life together where none of that mattered. Alejandro's eyes widened at this revelation. Leave? What do you mean, leave? With a deep breath, Amelia decided that the time for secrets was over. The night before the accident, she began, her voice trembling. Carlos and I had made plans to run away together. We were going to start a new life, far from here, where we could just be ourselves without the pressure of the Martinez name. The color drained from Alejandro's face as the implications of her words sank in. He collapsed into his leather chair, the letter fluttering forgotten to the floor. My son was going to abandon everything. For you? He whispered, more to himself than to Amelia. Seizing the moment, Amelia pressed on. Mr. Martinez, Carlos wasn't happy here. He felt trapped by the expectations placed on him, suffocated by the life that was planned out for him without his input. With me, he felt free to be himself, to dream of a different future. Alejandro's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. And who are you to decide what's best for my son? You filled his head with ridiculous fantasies, turned him against his family, his legacy. I didn't turn him against anything, Amelia retorted, her own anger rising to match his. Carlos made his own choices. He wanted a life of his own making, not one dictated by his father's ambitions. The two stared at each other, the weight of years of misunderstanding and hidden truths hanging between them. Finally, Alejandro spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. Tell me everything, from the beginning. And so, with a deep breath, Amelia began to unravel the tale of her forbidden love with Carlos Martinez. It had started innocently enough, she explained. When she first came to work at the mansion 5 years ago, Carlos had been kind to her, treating her with a respect that was rare among the wealthy elite she served. They would exchange brief conversations as she went about her duties, and she found herself looking forward to these small interactions. As time passed, their conversations grew longer, deeper. Carlos confided in her about the pressures he felt, the suffocating expectations of carrying on the Martinez legacy. Amelia, in turn, shared stories of her humble upbringing, her dreams of education and a better life. We connected over our shared feelings of being trapped, Amelia said softly, lost in the memories. Carlos by his family name, me by my circumstances. We both dreamed of something more. Their friendship had blossomed in secret, stolen moments in the gardens, hushed conversations in empty corridors. And then, one rain-soaked evening a year ago, everything had changed. I was caught in a sudden downpour while tending to the roses, Amelia recounted, her eyes distant. Carlos found me there, drenched and shivering. He offered me his jacket, and as he draped it over my shoulders, our eyes met. In that moment, we both knew that what we felt was more than friendship. From that day forward, their relationship had deepened, hidden from the prying eyes of the household. They met in secret, sharing dreams of a future together, away from the constraints of their current lives. Carlos talked about leaving it all behind, Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said the money, the prestige, none of it mattered if he couldn't be true to himself, if he couldn't be with the person he loved. Alejandro listened in stunned silence, his world tilting on its axis with each revelation. The son he thought he knew so well suddenly seemed like a stranger. The night before the accident, Amelia continued, her voice catching, we had finalized our plans. We were going to leave the next evening, start a new life together in a place where no one knew the name Martinez. Tears welled up in her eyes as she recalled their last moments together. Carlos was so full of hope, so excited for our future. He said he was finally going to be free, to live the life he'd always wanted. A heavy silence fell over the room as Amelia's story came to an end. Alejandro sat motionless, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, anger, disbelief, and a profound sadness that seemed to age him years in mere moments. "Why didn't he come to me?" Alejandro finally asked, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't he tell me he was unhappy?" Amelia's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "He tried, Mr. Martinez. Many times. But he felt you never really listened, that you were too focused on molding him into the heir you wanted him to be." Alejandro flinched at her words, memories flooding back of conversations dismissed, concerns brushed aside. Had he truly been so blind? "And now he's gone," Alejandro whispered, the full weight of his loss crashing down upon him anew. "My son is gone, and I never truly knew him." Amelia felt tears streaming down her own cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Martinez. I loved him so much, and I miss him every day." For a long moment, neither spoke, both lost in their grief for the man they had loved in such different ways. Finally, Alejandro looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "The accident," he said slowly. "You said you were supposed to leave the next day. Did Carlos seem worried about anything? Was there any indication that something might be wrong?" Amelia frowned, thinking back to their last conversation. "Now that you mention it," she said hesitantly, "Carlos did seem a bit on edge that night. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if he thought someone might be watching us." Alejandro leaned forward, suddenly alert. "Did he say anything specific? Anything at all that might have hinted at some kind of trouble?" Amelia closed her eyes, straining to remember. "He mentioned something about a conversation he'd overheard, something that had upset him. But he didn't go into details. He just said that it made our plan to leave even more urgent." A spark of something, determination, perhaps, or a desperate hope, flickered in Alejandro's eyes. "Amelia," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need you to think very carefully. Did Carlos ever mention feeling threatened by anyone? Did he have any enemies that you know of?" Confused by the sudden intensity of his questions, Amelia shook her head. "No, not that I can think of. Everyone loved Carlos. He was kind to everyone, from the highest executives to the gardeners. I can't imagine anyone wanting to hurt him." But even as she spoke, a memory surfaced. A conversation she'd had with Carlos just days before the accident. He had seemed distracted, worried about something he couldn't quite put into words. "Wait," she said slowly. "There was something. Carlos mentioned that he felt like someone close to the family wasn't who they claimed to be. He said he'd discovered something, but he didn't want to tell me what it was until we were safely away." Alejandro's eyes widened. "Someone close to the family?" he repeated. "Did he give you any hint who he might have been talking about?" Amelia shook her head. "No, he was very secretive about it. He just said that the sooner we left, the better." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of this new information sank in. Alejandro stood abruptly, pacing the length of his study with nervous energy. "Mr. Martinez," Amelia said hesitantly, "what are you thinking? Do you believe Carlos's death might not have been an accident?" Alejandro stopped his pacing, turning to face her with a grim expression. "I don't know, Amelia. But if there's even a chance that my son was, that someone might have." He couldn't bring himself to say the words. In that moment, something shifted between them. The anger and recriminations of earlier faded, replaced by a shared purpose: to uncover the truth about Carlos's death, no matter where it might lead. "We need to investigate," Alejandro said firmly. "If there's any possibility that Carlos's death was not an accident, we owe it to him to find out the truth." Amelia nodded, a mix of fear and determination coursing through her. "Where do we start?" Alejandro's eyes narrowed as he considered their options. "We start by looking closely at everyone who was close to Carlos in the days leading up to his death. His friends, his business associates, even members of our own household." A chill ran down Amelia's spine at his words. The idea that someone they knew, someone they perhaps saw every day, might be responsible for Carlos's death was almost too terrible to contemplate. "Mr. Martinez," she said softly, "if we do this, if we start digging into Carlos's last days, we might uncover things that will change everything. Are you prepared for that?" Alejandro's face hardened with resolve. "My son is dead, Amelia. My world has already changed irrevocably. All that matters now is the truth, no matter how painful it might be." As they stood there, united in their grief and their determination to uncover the truth, neither Amelia nor Alejandro could have imagined the web of lies, betrayal, and long-buried secrets that they were about to unravel. Little did they know that their investigation would shake the very foundations of the Martinez empire, exposing dark truths that had been hidden for decades. As they prepared to delve into the mystery surrounding Carlos's death, forces were already moving against them, shadowy figures determined to keep their secrets buried at any cost. In the coming days, Amelia would find herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the Martinez family and her place within it. Alejandro would be forced to confront painful truths about his own past and the legacy he had built. And somewhere, watching from the shadows, the person responsible for Carlos's death was preparing to strike again, determined to silence anyone who came too close to the truth. As night fell over the Martinez mansion, Amelia and Alejandro began their dangerous quest for answers, unaware that every step they took brought them closer not only to the truth about Carlos's death, but to a confrontation that would change their lives forever. The stage was set for a drama of passion, betrayal, and redemption, a story that would test the bonds of love and family, and force each of them to question everything they thought they knew about themselves and those around them. As Amelia left the study that night, her head spinning with all that had transpired, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. In the darkened corridor, a figure moved silently, melting into the shadows before she could turn to look. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. The early morning sun struggled to penetrate the heavy drapes of Alejandro Martinez's study, casting long shadows across the room. Alejandro sat at his desk, his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night, poring over old photographs and documents. The events of the previous day had shaken him to his core, forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about his son, his family, and the empire he had built. A soft knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called out, his voice gruff with exhaustion. Amelia entered, carrying a tray with coffee and a light breakfast. She looked as tired as Alejandro felt, her usual neat appearance slightly disheveled. "Good morning, Mr. Martinez," she said softly, setting the tray down on a side table. "I thought you might need this." Alejandro nodded his thanks, studying the young woman who had become an unlikely ally in his quest for the truth. In the harsh light of day, the anger he had felt towards her had mellowed into a confused mix of emotions, resentment, curiosity, and a grudging respect for her loyalty to Carlos. "Sit down, Amelia," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We have work to do." As Amelia took her seat, Alejandro spread out a series of documents on the desk between them. "I've been going through Carlos's personal papers," he explained, looking for any clues about what he might have discovered in the days before his death. Amelia leaned forward, her eyes scanning the scattered papers. "Have you found anything?" Alejandro sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Nothing concrete, but there are inconsistencies. Financial records that don't quite add up, meetings that aren't accounted for in his official schedule." He picked up a particular document, frowning as he studied it. "And then there's this. A week before he died, Carlos transferred a significant amount of money to an offshore account. I can't figure out why." Amelia's brow furrowed in confusion. "That doesn't sound like Carlos. He was always so careful with money, so transparent in his dealings." "Exactly," Alejandro agreed. "Which makes me think this transfer might be connected to whatever he discovered, whatever made him feel threatened." A heavy silence fell between them as they contemplated the implications of this discovery. Finally, Amelia spoke up, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Martinez, there's something I haven't told you. Something that might be important." Alejandro looked up sharply, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Amelia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "The night before the accident, when Carlos and I made our final plans to leave, he gave me something. A USB drive. He said it contained information that would change everything, but he wouldn't tell me what was on it. He made me promise to keep it safe and hidden until we were far away from here." Alejandro's eyes widened in shock. "A USB drive? Where is it now?" "Hidden," Amelia replied. "In a place only I know about." Carlos was adamant that no one else should know of its existence. Alejandro stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We need to see what's on that drive, Amelia. It could be the key to understanding what happened to Carlos." Amelia hesitated, torn between her promise to Carlos and her desire for the truth. I don't know, Mr. Martinez." Carlos was so insistent that it remain hidden. "What if looking at it puts us in danger?" "We're already in danger," Alejandro said grimly. "The moment we started asking questions about Carlos's death, we became targets. We need to know what we're up against." After a moment's deliberation, Amelia nodded. "You're right, I'll go get it now." As she stood to leave, Alejandro caught her arm. "Be careful," he warned. "We don't know who might be watching us." Amelia nodded, a chill running down her spine at his words. As she left the study, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to unleash forces beyond their control. While Amelia was gone, Alejandro found himself drawn to the large portrait of Carlos that hung on the wall. It had been painted just a year ago, capturing his son at the height of his youth and vitality. Looking at it now, Alejandro was struck by the sadness in Carlos's eyes, a sadness he had never noticed before. "Oh, my son," he whispered, reaching out to touch the canvas. "What secrets were you carrying? What burdens did I place on your shoulders without even realizing it?" The sound of the study door opening made him turn. Amelia had returned, clutching a small, nondescript USB drive in her hand. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything Carlos wanted to protect. With trembling hands, Alejandro took the drive and inserted it into his computer. For a moment, nothing happened, and he feared the drive might be corrupted. Then, suddenly, a folder appeared on the screen, filled with documents, spreadsheets, and video files. "There's so much here," Amelia breathed, leaning in to look at the screen. "Where do we even start?" Alejandro's eyes were drawn to a video file labeled, "Watch this first." With a sense of trepidation, he double-clicked on it. Carlos's face filled the screen, and both Alejandro and Amelia gasped. He looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously off camera as if he feared being overheard. "Dad, Amelia," Carlos began, his voice low and urgent. "If you're watching this, it means something has happened to me. I hope I'm wrong, but I fear my life may be in danger." Alejandro felt his heart constrict at his son's words. Beside him, Amelia let out a soft sob. "I've uncovered something terrible," Carlos continued. "A conspiracy that goes back years, maybe even decades. It involves people at the highest levels of our company, people we've trusted implicitly." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I don't have all the details yet, but what I do know is this. Someone has been siphoning off enormous sums of money from the company, using a complex network of shell corporations and offshore accounts. At first, I thought it might be simple embezzlement, but it's so much bigger than that." Carlos leaned in closer to the camera, his voice dropping even lower. "The money is being used to fund some kind of secret project. I don't know what it is, but from what I've pieced together, it's something dangerous, maybe even illegal. And Dad, I think it might be connected to Mom's death all those years ago." Alejandro felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him. His wife's death in a car accident 15 years ago had devastated him and Carlos. The idea that it might have been something more sinister was almost too much to bear. "I'm close to unraveling the whole thing," Carlos went on. "But I think they know I'm onto them. That's why Amelia and I need to leave, to get somewhere safe where I can finish my investigation without looking over my shoulder constantly." He paused again, his eyes filling with tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry for keeping this from you. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid of putting you in danger. And Amelia, my love, I hope we're watching this together, far away from here. But if not, know that I love you more than I've ever loved anyone in my life." The video ended abruptly, leaving Alejandro and Amelia staring at the blank screen in stunned silence. "Oh, Carlos," Amelia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What did you get yourself into?" Alejandro sat back in his chair, his mind reeling from the revelations in the video. "We need to go through everything on this drive," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Every document, every spreadsheet. We need to finish what Carlos started. As they began to sift through the files, a picture began to emerge, a complex web of financial transactions, coded communications, and shadowy meetings. The more they uncovered, the more horrified they became at the scope of the conspiracy Carlos had stumbled upon. Hours passed as they worked, piecing together the puzzle Carlos had left behind. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the study, Alejandro sat back, rubbing his tired eyes. "This goes deeper than I could have ever imagined," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of their discoveries. "Some of these transactions go back to before Carlos was even born. Whoever is behind this has been planning it for decades." Amelia nodded, her face pale with exhaustion and shock. "But who could it be? Who has that kind of patience, that kind of influence?" Before Alejandro could respond, a sharp knock at the study door made them both jump. "Mr. Martinez?" called out a familiar voice. "Are you in there?" Alejandro and Amelia exchanged a panicked look. It was Javier Dominguez, Alejandro's longtime friend and business partner. The same Javier who featured prominently in many of the suspicious transactions they had uncovered. "Just a moment," Alejandro called out, quickly closing the files on his computer and removing the USB drive. He nodded to Amelia, who quickly gathered up the scattered papers on the desk. As Alejandro opened the door, Javier strode in, his usual affable smile in place. "Ah, there you are, old friend. I've been looking all over for you. We have that meeting with the board in an hour, remember?" Alejandro forced a smile, acutely aware of Amelia's presence behind him. "Of course, Javier. I was just finishing up some paperwork. I'll be right there." Javier's eyes flickered to Amelia, a flicker of something passing across his face. "Amelia," he said, nodding politely. "I didn't realize you were working late." "Just tidying up, Mr. Dominguez," Amelia replied, her voice admirably steady despite the tension in the room. Javier's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary before turning back to Alejandro. "Well, don't be too long, my friend. You know how the board gets when we're late." As Javier left, closing the door behind him, Alejandro and Amelia let out a collective breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. "He knows something," Amelia whispered. "Did you see the way he looked at me?" Alejandro nodded grimly. "We need to be careful. From now on, we can't trust anyone but each other." As he gathered his things for the board meeting, Alejandro couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a lion's den. How many of the people he had worked with for years, people he had considered friends, were involved in this conspiracy? "Amelia," he said, turning to her before he left. "While I'm at this meeting, I need you to do something for me. In my safe, there's a file labeled, Isabella, my late wife's name. I've never been able to bring myself to look at it, but now I think it might hold answers we need." Amelia nodded, understanding the weight of what he was asking. "I'll find it, Mr. Martinez. Be careful at the meeting." As Alejandro left for the board meeting, his mind racing with all they had discovered, he couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The truth about Carlos's death, the conspiracy within his company, and the long-buried secrets of his wife's accident were all converging, threatening to shatter the world he had built. Little did he know that across town, in a dimly lit office, a figure was watching security camera footage of Alejandro's study, lips curled in a cold smile as they observed Alejandro and Amelia's clandestine investigation. "So," the figure murmured, "they think they can unravel our plans. How inconvenient." Picking up a phone, the figure dialed a number from memory. When the call connected, they spoke just 2 words: "It's time." As night fell over the city, the pieces of a decades-old puzzle began to shift, setting in motion events that would change the lives of everyone involved forever. The stage was set for revelations, confrontations, and perhaps even redemption, but at what cost? In the Martinez mansion, Amelia stood before the safe, her hand hovering over the handle. With a deep breath, she opened it, reaching for the file that held secrets long buried. As she pulled out the folder labeled, Isabella, a small photograph fluttered to the floor. Picking it up, Amelia gasped. The woman in the photo, Alejandro's late wife, was hauntingly familiar. With trembling hands, Amelia turned the photo over, reading the faded inscription on the back. In that moment, everything changed. The truth she now held in her hands would shake the very foundations of the Martinez family, and her own life, in ways she could never have imagined. As Amelia stared at the photo, her mind reeling from the implications of what she had discovered, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The past and the present were about to collide in a storm of long-buried secrets and shocking revelations. The true test of love, loyalty, and redemption was about to begin. Amelia's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The woman in the image, Alejandro's late wife, Isabella, bore an uncanny resemblance to someone Amelia knew all too well, herself. The resemblance was striking, the same dark, expressive eyes, the curve of the cheekbones, the gentle slope of the nose. It was like looking at an older version of herself, or perhaps... No, Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible in the empty room. It can't be. But as she turned the photo over, the faded inscription confirmed her wildest suspicions. Isabella and baby Amelia, 1999. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the implications of this revelation crashed over her. Could it be possible? Was Isabella Martinez, Carlos's mother, Alejandro's wife, her own mother as well? Amelia sank to the floor, her back against the cool metal of the safe, as memories flooded her mind. She had grown up in an orphanage, never knowing her parents, always told they had died in an accident when she was an infant. But now, a noise in the hallway snapped her back to reality. Quickly, she gathered the scattered contents of the Isabella file and shoved them into her pocket, her heart racing. She couldn't let anyone see what she had discovered, not yet, not until she understood what it all meant. As she closed the safe and hurried from the room, Amelia's mind whirled with questions. If Isabella was her mother, did that make Carlos her half-brother? The thought made her stomach churn, memories of their passionate embraces now tainted with an unthinkable possibility. And Alejandro, did he know? Had he always known who she really was? The idea that he might have hired her, watched her fall in love with his son, all while knowing she was his own flesh and blood, was almost too much to bear. Lost in her tumultuous thoughts, Amelia nearly collided with a figure rounding the corner. She looked up, startled, to find herself face to face with Javier Dominguez. "Amelia," Javier said, his voice smooth as silk. "What a pleasant surprise. What brings you to this part of the house so late in the evening?" Amelia forced herself to remain calm, acutely aware of the damning evidence hidden in her pocket. "Just some last-minute cleaning, Mr. Dominguez," she lied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Mr. Martinez requested a thorough job before tomorrow's meeting." Javier's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a flash of something, suspicion? Concern? Crossing his face before his usual charming smile returned. Of course. Alejandro always was a stickler for cleanliness. "Well, don't let me keep you." As Amelia hurried past him, she could feel Javier's gaze boring into her back. She didn't dare look back, afraid her face might betray the turmoil within her. Once safely back in her small room, Amelia locked the door and sank onto her bed, pulling out the contents of the Isabella file with shaking hands. As she pored over the documents, birth certificates, medical records, old letters, a picture began to emerge, one that shook her to her very core. Struggling Martinez family. In a series of heartbreaking letters, Isabella detailed her decision to give up her daughter for adoption, hoping to give her a better life than she and Alejandro could provide while battling her illness. The last letter, dated just days before Isabella's supposed accident, hinted at a dark secret. "My dearest Alejandro, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. I'm so sorry, my love, for the pain I know you must be feeling. But there's something you must know, something I've kept from you to protect you and our children. The cancer treatments, the medical bills, they were never the real reason I gave up our Amelia. The truth is far more dangerous, and it goes deeper than you could ever imagine. I have discovered something terrible about the company, about the people we thought we could trust. I wanted to tell you everything, but they threatened our family. They said they would hurt Carlos, hurt Amelia, if I didn't keep quiet. Giving up our daughter was the only way I could think to keep her safe from their reach. I've hidden evidence of what I've found. When the time is right, when it's safe, you'll know where to look. Until then, my love, be careful. Trust no one. Always and forever yours, Isabella. Amelia sat back, her mind reeling from the revelations. Isabella hadn't died in a car accident, she had been silenced. And the conspiracy Carlos had uncovered, could it be the same one his mother had stumbled upon all those years ago? As the pieces began to fall into place, Amelia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had to tell Alejandro everything, about her true identity, about Isabella's letter, about the web of lies and deceit that had shaped all their lives for decades. But as she stood to leave, a shadow fell across her window. Amelia froze, her heart pounding. The distinct shape of a human figure was visible through the curtains, watching her. In that moment, Amelia realized the true gravity of her situation. She wasn't just an unwitting pawn in a grand conspiracy. She was a threat, a loose end that needed to be tied up. And someone out there knew it. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone, ready to call Alejandro. But before she could dial, the screen lit up with an incoming call. The number was blocked. Against her better judgment, Amelia answered. Hello? A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. We know what you found, Amelia Sandoval. If you want to stay alive, you'll meet us at the old Martinez warehouse on the outskirts of town. Come alone, or Alejandro Martinez dies. The line went dead, leaving Amelia in stunned silence. How did they know her real name? How long had they been watching her? As panic threatened to overwhelm her, Amelia forced herself to think rationally. She couldn't go to Alejandro, not if it meant putting his life at risk. But she couldn't face this unknown threat alone, either. With shaking fingers, she dialed another number, one she had memorized but never used. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Who is this? How did you get this number? Amelia took a deep breath. Mr. Guzman? This is Amelia, from the Martinez household. I need your help. It's about Carlos. Ricardo Guzman, the Martinez family's longtime head of security, had always treated Amelia with a gruff kindness. More importantly, she had often seen him in deep, serious conversations with Carlos in the weeks leading up to his death. There was a long pause before Guzman responded. Meet me at the old gardener's shed in 10 minutes. Come alone, and make sure you're not followed. As Amelia snuck out of the mansion, the cool night air doing little to calm her frayed nerves, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. But what choice did she have? The old gardener's shed loomed before her, a dilapidated structure on the edge of the sprawling Martinez estate. As Amelia approached, the door creaked open, revealing Guzman's hulking silhouette. Get in, quickly, he growled, ushering her inside. The interior of the shed was surprisingly well lit, filled with monitors and communication equipment. Guzman locked the door behind them before turning to face Amelia. All right, girl, start talking. What do you know about Carlos? Amelia hesitated for only a moment before the whole story came pouring out. Her relationship with Carlos, his fears in the days before his death, the USB drive, and finally, the shocking discovery about her own identity. Guzman listened in stony silence, his expression unreadable. When Amelia finished, he let out a long, weary sigh. I was afraid of this, he muttered. Carlos came to me, you know, a few days before he died. Said he'd uncovered something big, something dangerous. Asked me to watch his back. Guilt flashed across Guzman's weathered face. I failed him. I thought I had every angle covered, but they were always one step ahead. Who were they? Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Guzman shook his head. I don't know for sure, but I've been doing some digging of my own since Carlos died. There's a shadow board, hidden behind shell companies and fake names. They've been pulling the strings of Martinez Enterprises for years, maybe decades. He turned to one of the monitors, pulling up a series of documents and photographs. I think Isabella stumbled onto their existence all those years ago. That's why she was killed. And now, they're cleaning house, tying up loose ends. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. The phone call I received. They want me to meet them at the old Martinez warehouse. They threatened to kill Alejandro if I don't go alone. Guzman's eyes narrowed. It's a trap, obviously. But it might be our only chance to flush them out into the open. He stood, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner of the shed. When he turned back, he was holding a small device. This is a tracking and recording device. We'll hide it on you. I'll have a team standing by to move in once we confirm who we're dealing with. Amelia nodded, trying to quell the fear rising in her chest. What about Alejandro? We need to warn him. I've already got men watching him, Guzman assured her. But we can't risk tipping our hand by telling him everything. Not yet. As they finalized their plan, a part of Amelia wanted nothing more than to run, to flee from this web of lies and danger she found herself entangled in. But a stronger part of her, the part that loved Carlos, that yearned for the truth about her own past, steeled her resolve. I'm ready, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Guzman nodded approvingly. You're braver than you know, girl. Carlos saw that in you. Now, let's go catch these bastards and get some justice for him. As they left the shed, neither of them noticed the small, blinking light hidden in the rafters. A camera that had captured every word of their conversation. Miles away, in a luxurious penthouse office, a figure watched the feed from that hidden camera with growing interest. A manicured hand reached for a phone, dialing a familiar number. Change of plans, the figure said when the call connected. The girl knows more than we thought. Proceed with extreme caution, and if Guzman interferes, eliminate him. As Amelia made her way towards the old warehouse, her heart pounding with each step, she was unaware that she was walking into a situation far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The truth about her past, about Carlos's death, about the very foundations of the Martinez empire, it was all about to come crashing down around her. And somewhere in the shadows, the architect of this decades-long conspiracy watched and waited, ready to protect their secrets at any cost. As the lights of the old Martinez warehouse came into view, Amelia took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The tracking device felt heavy against her skin, a constant reminder of the danger she was walking into. Little did she know that her every move was being watched, not just by Guzman and his team, but by unseen eyes with their own sinister agenda. As she approached the warehouse doors, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything, a collision of past and present that would shake the Martinez family to its very core. The truth was finally about to be unveiled, but at what cost? And would Amelia be strong enough to face the shocking revelations that awaited her in the shadowy depths of the warehouse? As she pushed open the heavy metal door, the creak of rusted hinges seeming to echo her own trepidation, Amelia stepped into the darkness, unaware that she was about to uncover secrets that would redefine everything she thought she knew about love, family, and the price of truth. The interior of the old Martinez warehouse was a labyrinth of shadows and rusted machinery, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. Amelia's footsteps echoed ominously as she made her way deeper into the cavernous space, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound confident. "I'm here, just like you asked." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the darkness ahead, a voice responded, smooth, cultured, and chillingly familiar. "Ah, Amelia, how good of you to join us." A figure stepped into the dim light cast by a grimy skylight, and Amelia felt her breath catch in her throat. It was Javier Dominguez, Alejandro's trusted friend and business partner, his usual charming smile replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent shivers down her spine. "Mr. Dominguez?" Amelia gasped, taking an involuntary step backward. What are you doing here?" Javier's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Come now, Amelia, I think we're past such formalities, don't you? After all, we're practically family." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. "You know," she whispered. "You know who I really am." "Oh, I know a great many things, my dear," Javier replied, circling her slowly like a predator stalking its prey. "I know that you are Isabella's daughter, hidden away all these years." I know about your forbidden romance with Carlos, your plans to run away together. And I know that you've been digging into things that are better left buried. Amelia's mind raced, trying to process this new information. But why? Why all the secrecy, the lies? And Carlos, did you kill him? Javier finished for her, his tone almost casual. Not directly, no. But I suppose you could say I set the wheels in motion. Carlos was becoming a problem, you see. Too idealistic, too determined to do the right thing. Just like his mother. The mention of Isabella sparked a flare of anger in Amelia's chest. You killed her too, didn't you? My mother. She discovered what you were doing, and you silenced her. Javier's expression hardened. Isabella made her choice. She could have had everything, wealth, power, a place at the table. Instead, she chose to play the hero. And look where it got her. As Javier spoke, Amelia became aware of movement in the shadows around them. Other figures were emerging, men and women in expensive suits, their faces impassive as they formed a circle around her and Javier. Allow me to introduce you to the true board of Martinez Enterprises, Javier said, gesturing to the assembled group. The power behind the throne, you might say. We've been guiding this company, and this family, for generations. Amelia's head spun as she took in the faces around her. Some she recognized, prominent business leaders, politicians, even a judge she had seen on TV. Others were strangers, but all wore the same expression of cold authority. But why? Amelia demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. What's it all for? The money, the power. Is that really worth destroying lives over? A mirthless chuckle rippled through the assembled group. An older woman, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, stepped forward. Oh, you naive child. This isn't about money or power. Those are just means to an end. What we're building here goes far beyond the petty concerns of one company or one family. We are shaping the future, another voice chimed in, belonging to a distinguished-looking man with a neatly trimmed beard. Guiding humanity towards its true potential. Sometimes, sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Amelia shook her head, disgust and disbelief warring within her. You're insane. All of you. You can't just play with people's lives like this. Can't we? Javier replied, his tone mocking. We've been doing it for decades, Amelia. Your grandfather, Isabella's father, was one of us. But he grew weak, sentimental. He wanted out, wanted to expose everything. So we removed him from the equation. The revelations kept coming, each one more shocking than the last. Amelia felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about her family, her past, dissolving into a nightmare of conspiracy and betrayal. And now, Javier continued, his voice hardening, we find ourselves with another loose end to tie up. I had hoped we might be able to bring you into the fold, Amelia. You have potential, just like your mother did. But I can see now that you're too much like her. Too principled. As he spoke, Amelia became acutely aware of the tracking device hidden beneath her clothing. Guzman and his team were listening, waiting for the right moment to strike. She just needed to keep them talking, to get as much information as possible. What about Alejandro? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Does he know about any of this? A flash of something, regret? Frustration? Crossed Javier's face. Alejandro is a useful figurehead, nothing more. He sees what we want him to see, believes what we tell him to believe. It's better that way. Safer. Safer for who? Amelia shot back. For him, or for you? Before Javier could respond, a commotion erupted at the far end of the warehouse. The sound of breaking glass and shouting filled the air, and suddenly the space was flooded with light as the emergency systems kicked in. FBI. Freeze. Guzman's voice boomed through a megaphone as armed agents poured into the warehouse from multiple entry points. In the chaos that followed, Amelia found herself pulled to the ground by a strong pair of hands. Stay down. Guzman growled in her ear, shielding her with his body as gunfire erupted around them. Through the mayhem, Amelia caught glimpses of the scene unfolding around her. Members of the Shadow Board scattered, some raising their hands in surrender, others drawing weapons of their own. She saw Javier sprinting towards a back exit, only to be tackled to the ground by 2 agents. As quickly as it had begun, the firefight was over. The warehouse fell silent save for the sounds of agents securing prisoners and calling for medical assistance. Guzman helped Amelia to her feet, his gruff exterior softening as he saw the shock on her face. "You did good, kid. Real good. We got him." But even as relief washed over her, Amelia knew this was far from over. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many threads of this conspiracy left to unravel. And then, cutting through the post-battle haze, a voice called out her name, a voice she knew all too well. "Amelia." She turned to see Alejandro Martinez pushing his way through the crowd of agents, his face a mask of confusion and concern. As their eyes met, Amelia saw the moment realization dawned on him, the recognition of her true identity, the understanding of all that had been hidden from him. "Alejandro," she breathed, unsure whether to run to him or away from him. I can explain." But before either of them could say another word, a shot rang out, echoing through the warehouse like a crack of thunder. Alejandro's eyes widened in shock, his hand going to his chest where a crimson stain was rapidly spreading across his crisp white shirt. As he crumpled to the ground, Amelia caught a glimpse of the shooter, a wounded member of the Shadow Board, using his last moments of freedom to exact revenge. "No!" Amelia screamed, rushing to Alejandro's side as chaos erupted once more around them. She cradled his head in her lap, pressing her hands against the wound in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. "Alejandro, please," she sobbed, all pretense of formality forgotten in the face of this new tragedy. "Stay with me. You can't die, not now. There's so much I need to tell you, so much you need to know." Alejandro's eyes flickered open, focusing on her face with effort. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice weak. "My God, you look just like her. Just like Isabella." "I'm your daughter," Amelia choked out, tears streaming down her face. "Your daughter and Carlos's sister. I'm so sorry we didn't tell you. We didn't know. I didn't know until it was too late." A ghost of a smile crossed Alejandro's pale lips. "A daughter," he murmured. "I should have seen it. Should have known." His eyes began to close, his breathing growing shallow. Amelia could hear people shouting for medics, feel hands trying to pull her away, but she clung to Alejandro desperately. "Please," she begged, to Alejandro or to God or to anyone who might be listening. "Please don't leave me, not when I've just found you." As paramedics finally reached them, working frantically to stabilize Alejandro, Amelia felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Guzman, his face grim. "Come on, kid," he said gently. "Let them do their job. We need to get you out of here." In a daze, Amelia allowed herself to be led away. As they exited the warehouse, the cool night air hit her like a physical shock, bringing with it a flood of emotions, relief, fear, grief, and a bone-deep exhaustion. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small and lost. Guzman sighed heavily. "Now, we start picking up the pieces. This conspiracy, it goes deep. There'll be trials, investigations. A lot of powerful people are going to fall. And Alejandro?" Amelia couldn't bring herself to use the word father just yet, even though that's what he was. "They're taking him to the hospital," Guzman replied. "It's touch and go, but he's tough. He'll pull through." As they walked towards a waiting car, Amelia suddenly stopped, a realization hitting her. "Wait," she said, turning to Guzman. "How did you know to be ready? How did you get the FBI involved so quickly?" Guzman's expression turned sheepish, an odd look on his weathered face. "That's a bit of a long story. One I think you deserve to hear." He opened the car door, gesturing for her to get in. "Let's head to the hospital. I'll explain everything on the way." As they drove through the quiet streets, Guzman began to talk. He told her about Carlos's suspicions, about the secret investigation they had been conducting together. About how, after Carlos's death, Guzman had reached out to an old contact in the FBI, setting in motion the operation that had culminated in tonight's raid. "Carlos wanted to protect you," Guzman said softly. "He knew how dangerous these people were. That's why he kept you in the dark about so much. He thought if you didn't know, you'd be safer. Amelia felt fresh tears welling up as she thought of Carlos, of all he had sacrificed. He should have trusted me, she whispered. We could have faced it together. Guzman nodded sadly. Maybe, but love makes people do strange things. Makes them think they can shield the ones they care about from all the darkness in the world. As they pulled up to the hospital, Amelia felt a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times in the past months had she found herself here, caught in the aftermath of some new tragedy? But this time was different. This time, she wasn't just a bystander. She was at the center of it all, daughter, sister, lover, the thread that tied together all the disparate pieces of this complex tapestry of lies and love. As she stepped out of the car, ready to face whatever came next, Amelia realized that the truth, as painful and complicated as it was, had finally set her free. The secrets that had defined her life for so long were out in the open, and though the road ahead was uncertain, at least now she could walk it in the light. Inside the hospital, as she waited for news of Alejandro's condition, Amelia found herself surrounded by a strange new family, Guzman, the gruff protector. The FBI agents who had risked their lives to bring down the conspiracy, and soon, she hoped, Alejandro himself. It wasn't the family she had imagined for herself, not the happy ending she had dreamed of with Carlos. But it was real, forged in the fires of adversity and bound together by a shared quest for truth and justice. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the hospital windows, Amelia closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of peace. The story wasn't over. There were still battles to be fought, wounds to be healed, truths to be reconciled. But for now, in this quiet moment, she let herself hope. Hope for Alejandro's recovery, hope for justice for Carlos and Isabella, and hope for a future where the shadows of the past no longer held sway over the promise of tomorrow. Little did she know that fate had one more twist in store, a revelation that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family. As she drifted off into an exhausted sleep, a figure watched her from the shadows of the hospital corridor. A figure whose very existence would soon turn Amelia's world upside down once more. The figure smiled softly, whispering words that were lost in the quiet hum of the hospital night. Sleep well, my dear. Tomorrow, the real story begins. In the coming days, as the dust settled and the true scope of the conspiracy came to light, Amelia would find herself at the center of a media storm. The long-lost daughter of Alejandro Martinez, raised in obscurity and unwittingly embroiled in one of the biggest scandals in the country's history. It was a story too sensational for the press to ignore. But even as she navigated press conferences and legal depositions, Amelia's thoughts remained fixed on Alejandro, fighting for his life in the ICU. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but the road to recovery would be long and uncertain. It was during one of her daily visits to Alejandro's bedside that Amelia first noticed him, a distinguished-looking man with salt and pepper hair, watching her intently from the other side of the glass partition. There was something hauntingly familiar about his features, a resemblance that tickled at the edges of her memory. When their eyes met, the man smiled, a sad, gentle smile that sent a shiver of recognition through Amelia. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the corridor before she could react. Who was that? She asked a passing nurse, her voice urgent. The nurse shrugged. Not sure. He's been here a few times, always watching. We assumed he was family. Family. The word echoed in Amelia's mind, setting off a cascade of questions and possibilities. Could it be possible? After everything that had happened, could there be yet another piece to this complex puzzle of her past? As she turned back to Alejandro's unconscious form, Amelia made a silent vow. Whatever secrets still lurked in the shadows of her family's history, she would uncover them. For Carlos, for Isabella, for Alejandro, and for herself, she would find the truth, no matter the cost. The man with the salt and pepper hair may have disappeared for now, but Amelia knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that their paths would cross again. And when they did, she would be ready. Ready to face whatever new revelations awaited her, ready to redefine, once again, the meaning of family, love, and identity. As she took Alejandro's hand in hers, Amelia allowed herself a small smile. The story wasn't over yet. In fact, perhaps it was only just beginning. The weeks following the warehouse confrontation passed in a blur of hospital visits, police interviews, and media frenzies. Amelia found herself at the center of a storm she could never have imagined. Her face splashed across newspapers and television screens as the long-lost Martinez heir caught in a web of corporate conspiracy. Through it all, she remained a constant presence at Alejandro's bedside. His recovery was slow but steady, each small improvement a victory celebrated by the strange new family that had formed around him, Amelia, Guzman, and a rotating cast of loyal employees and friends who had been untouched by the scandal. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, nearly a month after the shooting, that Alejandro finally opened his eyes and truly saw his daughter for the first time. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "My God, you really are her spitting image." Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes as she clasped his hand. "I'm here, Alejandro. I'm here, Dad." The word felt foreign on her tongue, but right somehow. Alejandro's eyes shimmered with emotion as he squeezed her hand weakly. "I should have known," he said softly. "All this time, you were right in front of me. Can you ever forgive me for not seeing it sooner?" Amelia shook her head, smiling through her tears. "There's nothing to forgive. We were all blind, in our own ways." As Alejandro regained his strength over the following days, he and Amelia began the delicate process of getting to know each other as father and daughter. They shared stories of Isabella, of Carlos, piecing together the fragments of their shared history. But even as they reveled in their newfound connection, the outside world continued to demand answers. The arrest of Javier Dominguez and several other members of the Shadow Board had sent shockwaves through the business and political world. As the full extent of the conspiracy came to light, more arrests followed, reaching into the highest echelons of power. Amelia found herself thrust into a role she had never anticipated, the public face of Martinez Enterprises. With Alejandro still recuperating, it fell to her to navigate the treacherous waters of damage control and corporate restructuring. It was during one particularly grueling press conference that Amelia saw him again, the mysterious man with the salt and pepper hair. He stood at the back of the room, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. As soon as the conference ended, Amelia pushed through the crowd of reporters, determined not to let him disappear again. But by the time she reached the spot where he had been standing, he was gone. "Looking for someone?" a familiar voice asked. She turned to find Guzman at her elbow, his eyes scanning the crowd with professional wariness. "The man with the gray hair," Amelia said urgently. "Did you see where he went?" Guzman's brow furrowed. "Can't say that I did." "Why? Who is he?" Amelia hesitated, unsure how to explain the strange feeling of connection she felt to this stranger. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "But I think he might be important." Guzman studied her face for a moment before nodding. "I'll look into it. In the meantime, be careful. We may have taken down the main players, but there could still be loose ends out there." His words were a sobering reminder that, despite the progress they had made, danger could still be lurking in the shadows. Amelia nodded, forcing herself to focus on the tasks at hand. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia threw herself into the work of rebuilding Martinez Enterprises. With Alejandro's guidance and her own innate business acumen, a trait she must have inherited from both her parents, she began to turn the company around, distancing it from its dark past and charting a new course focused on ethical practices and social responsibility. But even as she immersed herself in spreadsheets and board meetings, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a missing piece to the puzzle. The mysterious man continued to haunt her thoughts, appearing and disappearing at the edges of her life like a ghost. It was Alejandro who finally provided the breakthrough she had been hoping for. During one of their evening talks, as they pored over old family albums, he paused at a photograph Amelia had never seen before. "I'd almost forgotten about this," he murmured, tracing the image with a gentle finger. It showed a much younger Isabella, her arms around two men, a younger Alejandro, and another man Amelia didn't recognize. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing to the stranger. Alejandro's expression softened with a mix of fondness and old pain. "That's Miguel Sandoval, Isabella's brother. Your uncle, I suppose. We were all so close once, before. His voice trailed off, lost in memories. Amelia leaned in, her heart racing. Before what? What happened? Alejandro sighed heavily. It was complicated. Miguel and Isabella, they were always crusaders, always fighting for what they believed was right. When they started asking questions about some of the company's more questionable practices, it caused a rift. Miguel left, cut ties with everyone. Isabella was heartbroken. Amelia stared at the photo, drinking in the features of the man who might be her uncle. The resemblance to the mysterious figure she had been seeing was undeniable. Is he still alive? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Alejandro shrugged. I'm not sure. We lost touch years ago. Last I heard, he was doing humanitarian work somewhere in South America. That night, as Amelia lay in bed, her mind raced with possibilities. Could Miguel Sandoval be the key to unraveling the last mysteries of her family's past? And if he was the man she had been seeing, why hadn't he approached her directly? Determined to find answers, Amelia threw herself into a new investigation. With Guzman's help, she began to track Miguel Sandoval's movements over the past 2 decades. It was painstaking work, following a trail that had gone cold years ago, but Amelia was relentless. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a charity gala for the newly established Martinez Foundation, Amelia found herself face to face with an elegant older woman who introduced herself as Elena Vazquez, a former board member who had retired years ago. My dear, Elena said, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief, I've been waiting for the right moment to approach you. I think there's someone you should meet. Before Amelia could respond, Elena was guiding her through the crowd towards a quiet corner of the ballroom. And there, standing in the shadows, was the man with the salt and pepper hair. Hello, Amelia, he said softly, his voice rich with emotion. I'm Miguel Sandoval, your uncle. For a moment, Amelia could only stare, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, without thinking, she stepped forward and threw her arms around him. Miguel returned the embrace, holding her tightly as if making up for years of lost time. When they finally pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. I have so many questions, Amelia began, but Miguel held up a hand to stop her. And I have so many answers to give you, he said. But not here. Meet me tomorrow at the old Sandoval family home. It's time you learned the whole truth. The next day, as Amelia approached the grand but slightly neglected mansion that had once belonged to her grandparents, she felt a strange sense of coming home. Miguel was waiting for her on the porch, a bittersweet smile on his face. Over the next few hours, as they walked through rooms filled with memories and family heirlooms, Miguel unfolded a tale that filled in the final pieces of Amelia's fragmented history. He told her of the idealism he and Isabella had shared, of their determination to expose the corruption within Martinez Enterprises. But where Isabella had chosen to fight from within, trying to change the company through her influence on Alejandro, Miguel had taken a different path. I went underground, he explained, working with a network of whistleblowers and activists. We've spent years gathering evidence, building a case against the Shadow Board and their allies. Amelia listened in awe as Miguel revealed the extent of his work, a global operation that had been instrumental in bringing down not just the conspiracy within Martinez Enterprises, but similar corrupt networks around the world. But why didn't you come forward sooner? Amelia asked. Why let me and Carlos go through all of this alone? Miguel's face fell, regret etching deep lines around his eyes. I wanted to, believe me. But the work was too important, too dangerous. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I see now that I was wrong. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the old house, Miguel turned to Amelia with a serious expression. There's one more thing you need to know, he said quietly. It's about Carlos. Amelia felt her heart skip a beat. What about Carlos? Miguel took a deep breath. The night of the accident, it wasn't an accident at all. Carlos had reached out to me, said he had discovered something big. We were supposed to meet, to go over the evidence he had gathered. But he never showed up. The implications of Miguel's words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Are you saying that Carlos was murdered? Miguel finished grimly. Yes. And I think I know who was behind it. In that moment, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Amelia felt a fierce determination take hold of her. The truth about Carlos's death, the final piece of the puzzle, was within reach. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice steady and sure. "It's time we finished this, once and for all." As Miguel began to speak, laying out the evidence he had gathered and the connections he had made, Amelia felt as if her whole life had been leading to this moment. The legacy of Isabella's courage, Carlos's determination, and her own unwavering quest for truth were all converging, pointing her towards a final confrontation that would bring justice not just for her family, but for all those who had suffered under the Shadowboard's reign. In the days that followed, Amelia, Miguel, and their allies worked tirelessly to build an airtight case. They combed through financial records, tracked down reluctant witnesses, and slowly but surely closed the net around the last remaining members of the conspiracy. The final showdown came not in a dramatic courtroom battle, but in a series of coordinated raids and arrests that spanned the globe. Amelia watched from the command center, her heart pounding as reports came in from around the world. As the dust settled and the full extent of their victory became clear, Amelia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The fight wasn't over, there would be trials and appeals, years of legal battles ahead, but the tide had turned. The truth, so long buried, had finally come to light. In the aftermath, as Martinez Enterprises began the long process of rebuilding and redefining itself, Amelia found herself at a crossroads. The company was hers now, if she wanted it, a legacy left to her by both her parents, shaped by sacrifice and redeemed by truth. But as she stood in Alejandro's study, looking out over the city she had come to call home, Amelia realized that her path lay elsewhere. The skills she had honed, the determination that had driven her through this ordeal, they were needed beyond the boardroom. With Alejandro's blessing and Miguel's guidance, Amelia established the Carlos Martinez Foundation, dedicated to supporting investigative journalism and corporate whistleblowers. It was a fitting tribute to the brother she had loved and lost, a way to ensure that his fight for truth would continue. As for Martinez Enterprises, Amelia handed over the reins to a team of ethical, forward-thinking executives, with Alejandro serving as an advisor during the transition. The company would go on, reshaped by the crucible it had endured, a testament to the power of redemption and renewal. On a warm summer evening, almost a year to the day since her world had been turned upside down, Amelia stood on the balcony of her new apartment, looking out over the city lights. So much had changed, so many truths uncovered, so many bonds forged and broken and forged anew. She thought of Carlos, of the love they had shared and the future they had dreamed of. There was still an ache in her heart when she remembered him, but it was softer now, tempered by understanding and purpose. She thought of Isabella, the mother she had never known but whose spirit had guided her through the darkest times. In her work with the foundation, Amelia felt closer to her than ever before, carrying on the legacy of courage and compassion that Isabella had left behind. And she thought of Alejandro, of the complicated journey they had taken from employer and employee to father and daughter. Their relationship was still evolving, still healing, but it was real and true in a way it had never been before. As she stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, Amelia felt a sense of peace wash over her. The past could not be changed, but the future was hers to shape. And she was ready for whatever challenges it might bring. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reverie. She turned to find Miguel standing there, a warm smile on his face. "Ready to go?" he asked. "The board meeting for the foundation starts in an hour." Amelia nodded, grabbing her jacket. As they walked out together, uncle and niece, she felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected gift. A family forged not just by blood, but by shared purpose and unwavering loyalty. The elevator doors closed behind them, carrying them down towards the bustling city streets. As they descended, Amelia caught a glimpse of their reflection in the polished doors, Miguel's distinguished profile, her own determined gaze. For a moment, she could almost see Isabella and Carlos there too, smiling their approval. The doors opened, and Amelia stepped out into the warm evening air, ready to face whatever the future might hold. The story of the Martinez family, her family, was far from over. But now, at last, it was being written in the light of truth. Each new chapter a testament to the power of love, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As she and Miguel walked towards their waiting car, Amelia felt a lightness in her step and a warmth in her heart. The past had been unveiled, its secrets laid bare. Now, it was time to look to the future. A future bright with possibility, rich with purpose, and filled with the love of the family she had found, lost, and found again. The adventure, she realized with a smile, was only just beginning.